What's going on, YouTube? It's your boy Lonnie Reacts, and today we are back with another reaction video. Now, this is a video by the YouTuber MrBallen, one of my favorite YouTubers. I haven't watched one of his videos in a very long time though. He's at 10 million subscribers, which is insane. The last time I think I watched him, he was at maybe 5 million, so he's doubled. I'm really proud of him. He deserves it. Dude is an amazing storyteller. I just felt I was in a spooky mood and I wanted to react to something a little scary. So I thought, why not react to MrBallen? I haven't reacted to any of his content on this account, and I haven't even watched any of his recent content in like maybe a year or 2 years. So with that being said, I don't have too much to say. Let's just jump into this video and get scared shitless, man.
Today, we have a very special bonus video for you guys. It's a collection of 5 fan favorites that are all just straight nightmare fuel. Now, even if you've heard or seen one or all of these stories before, keep in mind they've all been completely re-edited for today's episode, so it should feel like a brand new viewing experience. But before we get into today's 5 stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to do the like button's laundry. But when you do a load of their colored clothes, go ahead and just fill it up with a whole bunch of bleach. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's 5 stories.
Let's get into it. The X-Man. Is this the X-Man of New Orleans?
In 2014, the United States Navy decided it was time to decommission one of their old frigate ships, and so they sent it to a dock to be broken down for scrap. In order for workers to actually be able to access the underside of the ship and actually begin to break it down, they would need to dry dock the ship, which meant the ship would basically drive into this special locking corral where the doors would shut behind it, the water would drain out from underneath, and the ship would be left resting on these huge wooden blocks that elevated it off the ground. And with no water in there, workers were able to get underneath the hull and could access every part of the ship without obstruction. It's important to note for this story that when a ship is in dry dock, there is only one way on or off. It's this ramp called a gangway that leads from the dock onto the deck of the ship. Besides that, there is nowhere else for you to get on this ship. And if for some reason you really wanted to get on and couldn't use the gangway, you could in theory try to run and leap from the dock to the ship. There's a pretty significant gap there all the way around, but you could try the jump. But if you weren't successful at grabbing onto the ship, you would fall multiple stories, probably to your death, because there's no water in the dry dock. So this old frigate ship that was being decommissioned was officially dry docked in July of 2014. The first group of people that went on board the ship to begin dismantling it were military personnel. They were in charge of removing all of the sensitive equipment before civilians were allowed to go on board. The military personnel begin to wrap up, and it's getting late in the day, and they tell the foreman, who's in charge of all of the civilian workers that are going to be going on and finishing this decommissioning of this ship. They go to the foreman and they say, hey, we're done, we're wrapped up for the night, your workers are good to go, they can get on here tomorrow. The foreman would send a message to his boss that night letting him know that they were on track to start work the next day. The boss would respond and say, hey, can you go on there tonight and take pictures of all the different workstations so we know how many people that we need to place in different segments of this big ship. So the foreman walks onto the ship and proceeds to take hundreds of pictures all over the inside of the ship. Now, the ship itself was pitch black inside. There was no electricity and it was nighttime. So he had a flashlight the whole time, but whenever he took a picture, he would turn his flashlight off and then use the flash on his camera before going back to his actual flashlight. So all night he's going room to room taking all these pictures, and at some point he realizes he's photographed everything he needs to. So he leaves, he goes back to his office, he uploads the pictures, and he sends them to his boss. His boss wrote back almost immediately and just said, who's the guy with the axe? Now, the foreman has no idea what he's talking about. He was just in the ship by himself for a couple of hours and didn't see anyone. So he reads the email again to make sure he read it correctly, and he sees that his boss has actually attached the picture he is referring to. Here is this guy clearly clutching an axe in a hallway that he was just in. And even creepier is the foreman is looking at where this picture was taken, and it was relatively...
You didn't see that? nigga, you didn't see that? Well, it might have been good he didn't see that, cause if he might have saw him, that man might have attacked him.
Early on in his photo shoot, and he had walked past the exact area where this guy is poking his head out of, which means the whole time he was down there, this guy with an axe was there with him. They review the security footage of a camera that was aimed directly at the ramp, the one entrance in and out of this ship, and from the time the foreman left, no one else left. So they don't know how he got on or how he got off without being detected, but somehow he did.
Insane. I don't know how to feel about that. They could have went so much worse. Um, just I think that goes to show just how like truly horrifying life can be. Just this man didn't even realize he could have died right there. He didn't even realize it. And you know, thankfully this man didn't notice the guy with the axe, because I genuinely believe if he noticed that guy would have attacked him. Just what the fuck was he even doing in there with the axe? What was he doing? The creeper ghost.
In July of 2016, a woman living in Chicago, Illinois named Jordan Baranskis opened her eyes and realized she had fallen asleep on the couch the night before. She looked up and the TV was still on, and then she looked down at the other section of the couch and her boyfriend Matt was also asleep on the couch. As much as she wanted to keep sleeping alongside her boyfriend, she had work that day, so she stood up, turned the TV off, and made her way upstairs to get ready. As soon as she got upstairs, the first thing she did is go into her bedroom and get her purse that she left on the foot of her bed. But when she got in the room, her purse wasn't there. So she leaves her bedroom and she starts searching all the rooms upstairs and she can't find her purse. And she's thinking to herself, I'm certain I had it the night before. I remember rifling through my purse before going downstairs and starting to fold laundry before ultimately falling asleep on the couch. So after spending about 15 minutes looking for the purse unsuccessfully, and now she's starting to stress because she's going to be late for work because she can't find her purse, she goes downstairs and she wakes Matt up and says, hey, I gotta find my purse. I thought I left it upstairs. Apparently I didn't. Can you help me look for it? Matt rolls over. He doesn't really want to get up because he's pretty tired and he doesn't have work, so he doesn't want to wake up right now. And he says, well, are you sure you didn't leave it at the restaurant last night? I mean, if you already looked, it's probably not here. You want to just give him a call and see if you left it there? Jordan was immediately really annoyed by his reaction because she just wanted him to stand up and help her look for the purse because she had work and he could just go back to sleep. And so it started this argument between the two of them where Matt just wanted her to call the restaurant because he was convinced she had it there, and Jordan was like, no, I know I had my purse. I'm positive I had it last night before I fell asleep on the couch with you. So their argument begins to escalate a little bit, and that's when Jordan remembers that they had recently installed a Nest camera downstairs to monitor their dogs whenever they were gone. And she thought, we can just look at the footage on the Nest camera, we can see me walking into the apartment, and I will either have or not have my purse in my hand. And so Jordan opens up her app and she calls Matt over and they go back to the night before, right before they left for the restaurant. She's got her purse in hand, they leave the front door, and then several hours go by and they come back in, and very clearly Jordan has her purse in her hand. And Jordan turns to Matt and says, told you so. And Matt's like, okay, fine, let me help you look. And as they're about to put the app down, she realizes on the Nest camera timeline that motion was detected at 3:30 in the morning when they were both clearly asleep on the couch. And so she calls.
Always 3 a.m., man. It's always 3 a.m. Why it's always 3 a.m.? Like, what's up with 3 a.m.? It just seems like all paranormal activity happens at 3 a.m.
Matt back over and says, here, look, there's motion detected at 3:30 in the morning, and they hit play. After the couple had fallen asleep on the couch with the TV on, a hooded figure emerges from their upstairs hallway and stands at the top of the stairs and just watches the two of them sleep before.
What the fuck? Your dogs, your dogs, Your dog. I'm sorry for coughing. But your dog didn't notify you. Maybe their dog wasn't home. I don't.
Before he left, he stole her purse along with a couple of other things from their apartment. And somehow, this guy has never been caught, and he's been given the nickname Creeper Ghost.
That could have been so much worse. Oh my god. Honestly, having a dog, bro, would really be beneficial. I'd assume that their dog wasn't there. But a situation like that, having a dog would be so fucking beneficial, bro. Like, oh my god. 37 demons.
In early 1974, 31-year-old Michael Taylor was living happily with his wife Christine and their 5 children in Ossett, which is a small town in central England. Michael was described as a great father and a great husband who had an excellent sense of humor. In fact, neighbors, whenever they would walk past the Taylor household, would say you could often hear the sound of Michael laughing or the sound of him telling jokes to his family. But in April of that year, everything changed for the Taylor family. Michael had been doing some home repairs when he fell off of a ladder and he hurt his back. The injury itself was fairly minor, but it resulted in chronic pain. And this chronic pain quickly changed how Michael behaved. Michael went from being this cheerful, funny, happy guy to being sad and depressed. And he was so irritable that his family could barely be around him because he would lash out at them. Now, the Taylor family was not a religious family. However, most families who lived in Ossett at that time were. And so when one of Michael's friends found out about how poorly Michael was doing, they approached Michael and said, you know, you really ought to turn to religion for help and for guidance in this difficult time. And they also told him specifically that he really ought to check out this one particular Christian group. It was called the Christian Fellowship Group, and all it was a prayer group for Christians who wanted more religious support beyond just going to church on Sundays. But this friend of Michael's told him that the real draw of this group was the group's leader. Her name was Marie Robinson, and she was this 21-year-old, extremely friendly and energetic and charismatic person who just had this incredible way of making all of her members really feel like they belonged. And so Michael's friend was telling him that he really thought Marie could be the difference maker for him, that she could help him get back to normal. And so Michael, you know, he trusted this friend, and he really didn't have much to lose at this point. He was already at rock bottom, and so he agrees to go check this group out. So on September 12th of that year, Michael makes his way to the church where this fellowship group is held. He goes inside and he makes his way to one of the back rooms in the church. And when he goes inside, he sees there's a ring of people sitting in a circle, about 20 people. And as soon as they see Michael coming in the room, they all stand up and they open their arms up and they say, come on, come sit down with us. Welcome to the group. And then the woman who had to be Marie, she stands up and she looks at Michael, huge smile on her face, and she encourages him to come over and sit right next to me. Welcome. We'd love to have you join our group. And so Michael, for the first time in ages, is smiling as he strides across the room and sits down right next to Marie. And then as Marie began to lead the group in prayer, Michael did not feel his chronic pain. He just felt happy again. But when the meeting was over and Michael went back home again, the pain and depression came flooding back. It was like the only place he could be happy was inside of the church at this fellowship group. And so over the next couple of weeks, Michael completely prioritized this group. He went to all of their meetings, and over the course of these couple of weeks, Michael became very close with Marie, and apparently Marie became very close with Michael, to the point where the two of them would stay after the meetings were over, and just those two would sequester themselves in quiet prayer. No one knew what they did in there, but it just seemed like they were developing a real relationship. And in fact, many people in this group suspected they were having an affair. And before long, the rumors in the church had spread outside and were all over Ossett. And then before long, Christine, Michael's wife, was hearing from a friend or a neighbor that apparently Michael was having an affair with Marie. Now, Christine had already suspected her husband was having an affair with Marie because Marie was the only thing Michael talked about when he got home. So on October 1st of that year, only a couple of weeks after Michael had first attended this group, Christine waited until Michael had left the house to head head out to one of the group meetings, and then Christine hopped in her car and she followed him to the church. And when she got there, she parked her car, she took a deep breath, and then she got out, she made her way to the front doors of the church, and she stormed inside, and she found the room where these meetings were held. She barges in, and she points at her husband, and she says, "I know you're having an affair with Marie, and you're going to admit it in front of this whole group." And Michael, who's sitting with his back to his wife in one of the chairs, he stands up, and instead of addressing his wife, who's accused him of infidelity, he turns and looks at Marie on the other side of the room. And when Marie made eye contact with Michael, she screamed. She would later say Michael did not look human. He looked like a beast, and he had wild eyes. And so as Michael is standing there staring at Marie with this very aggressive face, he began breaking out in tongues. Speaking in tongues is where the speaker will be saying or uttering words or sounds that sound like language, but the speaker doesn't know what they mean. The idea is some entity has come inside of their body, and this entity is dictating their speech. And so Michael is broken out in tongues. He's barking these words and sounds at Marie, and everyone inside of the room has no idea what to make of this. Everything has happened so suddenly, and it's so surprising. You have the wife suddenly coming in and aggressively accusing her husband of cheating, and Michael is not responding to it, and he's acting totally crazy. And then before anyone can do anything, Michael goes from just barking in strange languages at Marie to suddenly rushing across the room as if he's going to attack her. And when he does that, the rest of the members jump on top of him and hold him down. And despite there being like 10 or 15 people holding him down, Michael is still trying to get up, and he's screaming and snarling and yelling at Marie. And then Marie suddenly breaks out into tongues too. And it's only then that Michael stops trying to force himself up out of this pig pile that's on top of him, and instead he just continues to speak in tongues to her. And so the two of them are looking at each other speaking in tongues, and the rest of the group is just totally dumbfounded, and so they just begin praying. And then after about an hour, Michael just collapses. It's like he went unconscious. And at that point, everybody in the room just goes silent, and they look at Michael, and then Michael kind of opens his eyes, and it's almost like he's waking up, and he begins looking around frantically, trying to figure out what had just happened. Michael would claim he had no memory of what had just happened to him. And so at this point, Marie would tell him and Christine that she believed Michael was possessed by a demonic force, and the only thing they could do at this point would be to perform an exorcism. An exorcism is an expulsion or attempted expulsion of a supposedly evil spirit inside of a person or a place. Michael and Christine were at a loss. They had no idea what to do in this situation. They were both kind of in shock for very different reasons, and so they just kind of deferred to Marie's judgment and said, yeah, I think an exorcism is the way to go. So Christine and Michael just leave the church and go home, and then the next morning, Marie would get in touch with the Anglican Church of England and would request an exorcism. And after hearing about what was going on with Michael, the Anglican Church would say, yeah, that does sound like he needs an exorcism. And so the following day, they would send out two of their best exorcists named Peter and Raymond. And so Peter and Raymond, they get to Ossett, they go to Michael's house, and they observe him, and very quickly they determine that it does seem like Michael is possessed by at least one demonic force. And so they tell Michael, the only thing we can do here is perform this exorcism, but we need you to agree to it. And so Michael says, okay, yeah, I agree to this exorcism, and so would his wife, because she at this point is just completely unsure what to do. She's just going along for the ride. So a day later, on October 4th at 10 p.m., Michael, his wife, and the rest of the members of this fellowship group, along with Peter and Raymond, they would all meet at this other church in a neighboring town. And as soon as Michael had been positioned in the middle of this group in this chair, Peter and Raymond began the ritual by praying. And as soon as they did, Michael began screaming out in tongues, and he began writhing around, and he fell to the ground, and he began contorting his body in grotesque positions, as if the words Peter and Raymond were saying were physically harming Michael. And so after 8 hours of this, during which they had to actually tie Michael down to prevent him from hurting other members or hurting himself, after 8 hours, they finally just came to a stop. Peter and Raymond were exhausted. It looked very much like Michael too was exhausted, dead, and as soon as they stopped the ritual, Michael just kind of collapsed on the ground as if he had fallen unconscious. And then at some point he kind of wakes up and he's looking around wildly. He's still tied down to the ground and he's acting like he has no idea what's just happened. And at this point, Peter and Raymond, they tell him that, the exorcism was mostly successful. We identified 40 demons inside of you, and this exorcism was able to expel 37 of them. So that means there's still 3 demons inside of you. Now, we can't do it right now. We're too tired. You're too exhausted. So go home, get some rest, and tomorrow we will finish this exorcism. We will get rid of those 3 demons, and you will be just fine. And so Michael and Christine, they get their things, and they leave the church, and they head home. A few hours later, around noon, a woman who lived near where Michael Taylor and his family lived thought she heard something strange outside of her house. It sounded like someone yelling. And so she went to the front of the house and she pulled the curtain aside on one of her windows, and outside, walking down the street completely naked, covered in blood, was Michael Taylor, and he was saying something about Satan. And so this woman, she calls the police show up and they find Michael. He had curled up on the sidewalk outside of this woman's house, and he was giggling like a child in the fetal position. And so the police approach him, and at some point Michael apparently snaps out of it, and he starts looking up at the police like he has no idea what's going on, and eventually they would get him to tell them his name and where he lived. And so after calling in backup to deal with Michael, the responding officers made their way to Michael's residence. And so
Oh my God. Did he kill his wife?
they go inside, and immediately, as soon as they see what's in there, one of the officers just turns around and runs outside and begins dry heaving. The inside of the Taylor family home would become one of the most infamous crime scenes in English history. A few hours earlier, when Michael and his wife had come home from the exorcism, they had gone inside, and then Michael had fallen into one of his trances and began beating his wife. And then at some point, she fell to the ground and either was dead or was in the process of dying, at which point Michael jumped on top of her, and using only his hands, he ripped her face off and flung it across the room. And then as she's laying there bleeding to death, he began rubbing her blood all over his body. And then after she had finally died, he tracked down the family dog and killed the dog as well. Fortunately, their 5 children were not home at the time of this attack, and so they were unharmed. During Michael's trial, the prosecution and the defense blamed the Anglican Church of England and Marie and her religious group for effectively convincing Michael he was possessed with demons, which caused him to act out violently and kill his wife. And so ultimately, Michael would be found not guilty by reason of insanity, and after only 4 years of psychiatric care, he was released, and today he is still living free in Ossett.
These niggas in jail for 30 years for weed.
But despite the legal outcomes of this case, there are many people, both religious and not religious, who believe the Michael Taylor case is one of the only true demonic possession cases in modern history. Also, just to close the loop, we don't know for sure if Michael and Marie were having an affair, but it is assumed they were. It begins here. From the director of It comes It, Welcome to Derry, the chilling new HBO original series exploring one of horror's biggest terrors, Pennywise the Clown. Set in 1960s Derry, Maine, the new HBO original series premieres Sunday, October 26th on HBO Max. Also, you can listen to the official It, Welcome to Derry podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Young boy, they gonna kill you. You better stop dishing them. Tell them now.
In
Aquaman.
1898, a 12-year-old boy was playing at this river that ran near his house. He was out in the forest, he was playing to this river, and he had a bow and arrow, and he was practicing shooting his bow and arrow. And after a little while, he got bored of his bow and arrow, and he went to the stream itself, and he started to build a little dam in the river to try to catch some fish. And as he's building this thing up, he's down on his knees building up this little dam in the river. He notices someone is walking down the river towards him, and he looks up, and he would describe this person as looking normal, a normal-looking stranger. It's a gentleman who shows up. He's wearing a nice suit. He walks over to Wofford, and he apparently just came out of the woods. And he says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And the boy, he's like, "Oh, I'm making this fish trap." And he's like, "Man, that looks like a lot of work. Like, you should take a break." And the boy's like, "Yeah, I guess I could take a break." And the gentleman just says, "Well, if you want, while you're taking this break, you can come to my house. It's just up past the bend here. My family's there. You can have a meal with us, and then you can come back and you can finish your fish trap." And so, this is a different time. This is the late 1800s, and I'm not suggesting that at the time it was totally cool to go with strangers into weird houses in the forest, but the boy felt compelled to say yes. He didn't want to be rude, and maybe his fear of strangers is less extreme than it is, for us today in 2020. And so he agrees to go with the man. They make their way up past the river into the forest a little bit, and they come up to this cabin. Now, the boy played in the woods here, and he had never seen this house before. But he's not too concerned, because as soon as he gets to the house, this cabin in the woods, he sees that the lights are on, and he hears kids playing inside, and a close family friend of his family's is sitting on the porch talking to one of the other apparently family members of the stranger. And so the boy's put at ease, and he says hi to the family friend, and the family friend, waves back. The boy goes inside, and he sees that this family has a couple of kids roughly his age. They're playing.
I'm forgetting, bro. This is a fucking scary story, bro. Like, MrBallen, you trying to make shit sound sweet? This shit finna be horrible. And it's number 2. Oh my god.
Around, they have dinner, and this wonderful meal, and the boy Wofford is like, "Man, this is so great." And after the meal, he lays down and falls asleep. He kind of loses track of time. The boy falls asleep at this cabin. And so he wakes up early the next morning, and he feels horrible because he didn't mean to fall asleep, and he didn't tell anyone from his family where he was going. And he's thinking, man, they're going to be so worried about me. And so as he's getting up to leave, the stranger is already awake, the one that had met him down by the river and called him up to the house. And the boy says, "Hey, can you walk me down back to the river?" And the stranger's like, "I can take you part of the way down, sure." So the two of them, they're having small talk, and the boy's thanking the man for his generosity. And so as they're walking, they're passing by an orchard on one side and a cornfield on the other. And it's this beautiful morning, the sun's just coming up, and the boy remembers thinking how beautiful the setting was. But he also was thinking, like, I don't even know where I am right now, and I'm assuming he's walking me back to where I live, but this doesn't look familiar at all. And the stranger stops. They get to almost a junction right at the end of the orchard and of the cornfield. And the stranger tells the boy, Wofford, he says, "Hey, just go straight. You're going to turn down this way, turn back, and you'll be at the river again where we met." And the boy thanks the stranger, and the stranger turns and starts walking back towards his cabin and says, "Hey, good luck, see ya." And the boy starts following the man's directions. And Wofford, as he's walking, following the stranger's directions, he's suddenly curious and turns around to look back at this strange person who had brought him up to the house and then now brought him back. And he's stunned because suddenly the orchard and the cornfield are not there. There is no orchard or cornfield. It's just deep, dark forest. And he's like, "What's going on?" He turns back, and there's a search party, or it looks like a search party, running up to him. Part of the search party is the family friend that he had seen at the house. And the boy's like looking at these people running towards him, like they're running to him. And he recognizes the family friend, and he can tell they're like urgently looking for him. And he felt bad because he knows he slept over through the night. So he's like, "Hey, I'm here. And they're like, "Where have you been?" And the boy turns to the family friend, and he's like, "Didn't you tell them I was with you?" And the family friend is like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Yeah, the house with the family. We ate dinner together last night." And the guy, the family friend, is like, "I've been looking for you for the past several days. I've been with your family looking for you. You've been gone for 3 days." And the boy is like, what? And as he's describing the kind of general vicinity of where this cabin was, he's kind of pointing back up towards where it was and describing it from where the river was. The family says to him that since you've been missing, we've heard rhythmic drumming non-stop coming from the section of the forest that you just described. We could never pinpoint where it was coming from. And now that you just showed up, the drumming has stopped. And so the kid's terrified, but there's no answers. Pretty creepy.
Shut up.
By early 1999, Christopher Case was living his best life. He was 35 years old. He had moved out to Seattle to pursue a career in music, and he had landed a job at a music company in Seattle, and he had risen to the rank of executive at that company. He was incredibly fit. You know, he was known for being at the gym 7 days a week. You know, he took vitamins. He took his health very seriously. He had loads of friends. People really liked him. He was very close with his family. And, you know, despite all that, despite his popularity and success, he had been single for years. And even though he was not actively seeking a companion, his friends and family were continuously trying to set him up on dates. But Chris would prefer to not go on a date and actually stay home by himself and listen to music, because Chris had an obsession with a very specific type of music. He loved music from ancient times, specifically from Egypt. And so he would stay home instead of go out on dates and, you know, crush ancient Egyptian music. That was like his idea of a great night. On April 11th of 1999, Chris was on a business trip because part of his job required a ton of travel. And he was on a trip with a couple of his coworkers, who were also friends of his. They go out to San Francisco, and on the 11th, they decide to go out for dinner that night. And one of his coworkers decides to bring along a friend who was someone that lived in the area. So they get to dinner, and one of them has their friend, who's an older woman, very attractive, very kind of intense-looking woman. She was about 20 years older than Chris. That was his guess. And she sits down, and the four of them are just kind of having a nice conversation. And at some point, the older woman really takes an interest in Chris, and Chris takes an interest in her because it would turn out that they had a lot in common. And then she actually admitted to him that she was really into music from ancient times and actually has a specific interest in music from ancient Egypt. And so to Chris, he's like, how can this be? And he's like, this is my passion. I love that type of music. And they really hit it off. Now, Chris was not looking for any sort of romantic involvement with this woman. He was just so excited to talk about something he loved. And so all night, Chris and this older woman are chatting it up, and they're super into each other. He was looking at her purely from a platonic sense, but it was becoming clear by the end of the night, at least Chris was realizing this, that she was looking at him with a romantic angle. She was interested in Chris. And in fact, right as he's kind of realizing this, she asks him if he wants to leave with her and go back to her place. And he politely declines because he's not interested. He loved chatting with her about music and other things they had in common, but he wasn't interested in her romantically. And she became a little bit more aggressive and said, no, come on, let's get out of here. I got a place right down the road. We can go listen to music and hang out in my place. And he felt really uncomfortable, and he kept saying no, but she wouldn't let it go. And so finally, as she's literally trying to get him to say yes, he says, hey, you know what? I've had a long night. I'm going to go. And so he stands up to leave, and the woman goes from being very flirtatious and friendly to very angry at Chris. And she looks at him and kind of abruptly says to him,
I'm actually a witch, and I'm going to put a curse on you. You're going to be dead within a week.
Okay. And he just leaves. So the next morning, on April 12th, Chris gets up and he heads to the airport and he flies back to Seattle. When he lands in Seattle, he calls his friend Sammy, who was one of his very close friends back when he lived on the East Coast. He just wanted to share this weird experience with a close friend. And so they're kind of laughing about the whole thing. Neither of them are taking the curse seriously at all. Okay. It was like, you really dodged a bullet. It's good you did not go home with her. So in good spirits, Chris hangs up the phone with Sammy, and for the next 24 hours, Chris would fall right back into his regular daily life in Seattle. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. But all that would change starting the night of April 13th, which would have been 48 hours after his encounter with this woman in San Francisco. So Chris lives alone, he doesn't have pets, and he gets into bed that night and he's laying there, and before he falls asleep, he hears whispering coming from outside of his bedroom in the kitchen area, kind of near the front door. And he's thinking to himself, like, I didn't just hear whispering. Like, what? No one's in here. What's going on? And he's hearing the whispering, and then it kind of stops. And before he gets up to investigate, he's like, okay, I probably was just...
I gotta get a big ass pit bull, man. No, or a Rottweiler, bro. Cause like, this world just too insane, bro. Like, this world is just too crazy.
Hearing things that wasn't real. And he's just kind of laying there trying to go to sleep, and then he hears it again. Except now it's not coming from the kitchen area, it's coming from a separate area in his apartment outside of the room he's in. And so now he's wondering, like, did someone sneak into my house? Like, is there a burglar in my house right now? And so he quietly gets out of his bed and he walks over to his door, he opens it up, and he can still hear the whispering, and it's coming from like his laundry room a little ways away. But as soon as he opens the door and he pokes his head out, the whispering stops. And he's just standing there, like, looking around, like, hoping that there isn't anything in his apartment. And then out of the corner of his eye, near the front door, he sees something dash across his periphery. Like a shadowy figure basically darts across the room. And so he looks over, and he's immediately afraid that it really is a burglar in his room. And as he's looking, he's turning the light on next to him, he's looking around, and he starts hearing the whispering again, and now it's coming from...
Get you a dog, get you a gun, nigga. I think the best home defense weapon is honestly a fucking shotgun. Like, genuinely. Pistols are cool, but for house defense, bro, honestly, give me a shotgun. One of those semi-automatic shotguns that look like ARs. Give me one of those motherfuckers. Like 12 slugs, 12 shots in them. That's all I need. Trust me.
Another section of his house. So he just starts turning on all the lights and looking around to try to, like, make sure no one's in his apartment. He's not even thinking about the whispering. He's just looking for this shadowy figure that he saw run past him. And so he's looking all over his apartment. All the lights are on. It's a small apartment. And as soon as he feels comfortable that the door's locked still, everything's locked, and there's nobody here, that's when he realizes that that whispering is still happening. And so he turns back around, and now the whispering's coming from his bedroom where he was. And so he walks over to his bedroom and looks inside, and he can't pinpoint the whispering. Like, he keeps hearing it and walking to wherever it's coming from, and as soon as he gets near it, the whispering stops. And he's thinking to himself, like, am I dreaming? Is this a dream? Am I losing my mind? Did somebody slip me something, like, last night? Like, what's wrong with me? So he has this horrible night where he's up all night chasing down whispers in his apartment that keep vanishing, and then seeing shadowy figures running around and lurking in corners, but he can't ever see them when he looks at them. And so the next morning on April 14th, when, you know, the sun comes up, he hasn't slept, the first phone call he makes is to Sammy, his friend. And he's totally panicked, and we know about this phone call because Sammy would tell police about all her interactions with Chris over the course of this week. She would say that he was totally panicked. And she even thought, as she's taking this phone call, that it's just so weird, you know, that Chris is scared of noises in his apartment and, like, figures moving around in his apartment, because it's so unlike Chris. He's, I mean, definitely a skeptic. He's just like he's a no BS kind of guy. So the idea that he would suddenly be terrified of something paranormal running around his apartment just seems so unlike him. But as she's listening to him, he was so scared about what was in his apartment. He knew it wasn't a person because he looked everywhere. There was no people. And that's the only reason he didn't call the police, is because he didn't want to tell the police that some shadow figure that's whispering in my apartment is harassing me. Like, what are the police gonna do? So Sammy hangs up the phone with Chris after trying to reassure him and just hopes that whatever that was doesn't happen again. But unfortunately for Chris, the night of the 14th now, he's going to bed again, and he starts hearing the whispers, and immediately he's out there looking, lights on. He's looking for these whispers. They keep disappearing. He can't find the source. He's getting frustrated. He's scared. He keeps seeing that thing dart around his apartment, except this night he also noticed that he would look, and he could get close enough to where he could break out the silhouette of what looked like a person, you know, like lingering in the corner of his apartment, but he'd go closer to it and it would disappear. It was like the manifestations of what he was seeing, the whispers and this figure running around his apartment, were becoming more vivid. But he's also thinking like, I didn't sleep the night before. This could be my imagination. Like, I don't know if this is happening, but he's spiraling and he knows it. So the next day on the 15th, he doesn't call Sammy, but he calls a couple of his other friends that are anonymous, and they would all tell police that they got a similar story that Sammy had gotten that first night after the 14th. No matter what was happening, Chris believed it was happening, and Chris was terrified. But this wasn't even the worst of it yet. So that night on the 15th, Chris gets in bed, and now he's barely slept for 2 consecutive nights, and he's determined to just go to sleep. That he's trying to tell himself that everything that you've experienced the past couple nights is probably brought on by stress. It's brought on by now certainly a lack of sleep. So he's telling himself, like, just go to sleep. Just get in bed and go to sleep. So he gets in bed and he's laying there, and he does fall asleep. But he wakes up in the middle of the night and he can't move his body. He's paralyzed, he can't move, and he's totally awake. And he starts hearing whispering. And now his level of fear is so high because now he's immobile. But the past 2 nights he's heard that whispering.
I've never experienced sleep paralysis, bro, and I never want to. I hope I never experience
his apartment, and he's seen that figure moving around his apartment. And so he's laying there in darkness because he went to bed in darkness. And he starts hearing whispering outside his room, and then it stops. And then he starts hearing whispering inside of his closet, and then it stops. And then he hears whispering right underneath his bed, and he can't move. And he's just laying there praying that nothing horrible is going to happen to him, that this is just a dream. And then out from underneath his bed, right next to him, he can only turn his eyes. This black figure, this shadowy black figure emerges right next to his bed. And it's looking down at him. He can't make out any facial expressions, but he can clearly define, a figure is hovering over him. And it reaches down and puts its hands around his neck and begins to throttle him. And Chris is like gagging, he can't breathe, but he can't move, and at some point the thing begins to lift him off of his bed by his neck, and then throws him back down, and then the figure vanishes. Chris still couldn't move. He's choking to breathe, but he can't move, and he's just waiting for this thing to come back. And he knows that more than likely, whatever this is probably going to kill him this night. So he's laying there just thinking, oh my God, I'm about to die, I'm about to die. But the thing doesn't come back, and Chris can't move. And at some point, Chris, probably out of just pure, adrenaline crash or something, he falls asleep. And so when Chris wakes up and he can move again, he notices there's blood inside of his bed on his sheets. And then he looks at his hands, and at the tips of all 10 fingers are these incisions, like someone had intentionally cut open the top of every finger, something he certainly didn't do. And his bed is covered in blood from these 10 cuts on his hands. And then he feels his neck, and it feels tender. And it turns out he had marks in his neck. It was all bruised up from this thing choking him out. And it brought him back to that really happened. He's now actually in fear for his life. Chris immediately calls Sammy and tells Sammy everything that happened. And Sammy can't believe any of it. She felt helpless because she's on the other side of the country. She can't help him. And Chris is just petrified. And he's he can barely speak, he's unable to articulate what's happening. He's describing these cuts on his hand and his neck, but there's no one in his apartment. And Sammy's trying to get him to call the police, but Chris is I can't call the police. What am I going to tell him? That a shadowy figure is coming in my apartment and just choking me? They're going to think I'm crazy. Chris decides he's going to approach this head on. Maybe that woman in San Francisco did put some curse on me. I need to go at least research it. And so there was a religious bookstore right near his house that he figured might have some things on demonic possession and demons, the occult. And he goes in there and he kind of awkwardly approaches the store owner and is like, I'm looking for, books about demons and witchcraft and how to protect yourself against that. And the guy points him towards a section of the store. And so Chris goes over there, he scoops up a whole bunch of books. He also buys a whole bundle of crucifixes. So at least 10. So he's got all these crucifixes, he's got all these books about demonic possession and witchcraft. He buys all of that and he leaves and he goes back to his apartment. When he gets back after doing some research, he ends up putting these crucifixes all over his apartment, every room. And he takes salt and he draws a line all through his apartment against the baseboard of every wall in the house. And at every corner of the house, he'd pile up little piles of salt. He was going to do all the things that people say to do if you're dealing with demons or ghosts or anything through witchcraft. He was kind of grasping at straws a little bit. So he went out and did everything he thought he could possibly do to protect himself. That night, which was April 16th, we don't know what happened to Chris, but something scared him so badly that in the middle of the night, in a full panic, he runs out of his apartment and he checks into a hotel and does not stay at his apartment. The next morning, April 17th, when Sammy called Chris to check on him, now remember, this is 1999, there was just landline phones. So she calls his landline at his apartment to check on him. There's no answer because he's not there, he's at the hotel. And Sammy, who's been speaking to Chris, and other friends that have been speaking to Chris, and everyone's concerned about his mental health and what's going on with him, when she doesn't get Chris to pick up his phone, she calls the police and she says, hey, I'm concerned about my friend. Can you do a welfare check on this guy? And they go over to his apartment and it's locked, and they kind of look in the windows and everything just seems kind of quiet. And so they leave and they tell Sammy, like, hey, look, it's locked. We can't really do anything. Let us know if you don't hear from him in the next couple of days. And so that was it. And so Sammy's like super concerned. And so she goes to work on the 17th. And then when she gets back, she has a voicemail from Chris, who had called her at some point during the day while she was out. And on the voicemail, Chris tells her in a voice that was different than the past few days. The past few days, he was scared. He was really scared. This time, he is defeated. He was like resigned to whatever was going on. And he says to Sammy on the voicemail, he's under attack. And that tonight, they're gonna kill me. And there's nothing I can do. As soon as she's done listening to the message, Sammy calls Chris, but she can't get in touch with him. She knows she just talked to the police who were there at his apartment that day. They're probably just going to tell her, like, hey, wait until tomorrow. We just told you, earlier, just give it a couple days. And so she just decides that she's going to go to bed and she's going to try calling him again on April 18th. On the morning of April 18th, Chris didn't show up for work. And word got back to Sammy, who was already going to reach out to Chris that morning anyways. But, the friends and family are talking about what's going on with Chris. And so word got back to her that Chris had missed work. And so she calls Chris. He's not picking up from his landline. And now she calls the police back and she says, hey, you were there yesterday. I know it was locked, but he hasn't shown up for work today. Everybody's concerned about him. Can you please go over and check? And so the police go back over to Chris's apartment, and this time the front door is unlocked. And they go inside and they're met with this very strange scene. You have all these crucifixes that are on the wall. You have the salt that lines every room in the house. There are all these candles that have burned down to the wick. There are little scraps of paper all over the apartment that were handwritten, little messages that Chris was leaving all over the house, warding off spirits and demons. I mean, it just looked like out of a Hollywood set for some demonic movie or something. And they search the house and there's no sign of Chris. They're yelling for him. There's no sign of him. And they make their way into the bathroom where they discover Chris's body. Chris was in his bathtub. No water in the bathtub. He's fully clothed. There's all these candles all around the outside of this bathtub. There's, more crucifixes and weird relics that are in the bathroom with him. And he's on his knees and he's slouched up against the wall with his hands kind of tucked against his chest. He had no external injuries. He was just dead. And so the police take Chris's body and the coroner comes in and does a report, and it comes out that Chris died of natural causes. He died of a heart attack. And so when friends and family saw that that was his cause of death, they didn't buy it. They were like, I don't know how to describe what happened to him. But over the past 7 days, Chris went from this happy, healthy, successful guy to a complete raving paranoid lunatic. And no one knows why. It's certainly possible that it was just a very poorly timed heart attack, mixed in with someone having a psychotic break. Or some people say that he really was cursed by that woman in San Francisco and that was the result. She said, you're going to die within the week, and he literally died within the week. And he described regularly over the phone to his friends and family as this was happening, these horrible experiences at night with these shadow beings in his room and it attacking him. It's just this crazy story that to this day leaves friends, family, and investigators baffled.
Man, that was insane. Wow, just oh my God. It's so much shit that goes on in this world, bro. Like, oh my God. I really think that man was cursed. Um, I, I truly believe that woman genuinely put a hex on that man or did something. Just, I'm like, that was disturbing. Oh my God. If you did like this video, please like it and subscribe so I can continue doing these reaction videos. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.